And we're live in a living color from Scimitar Studios in Denver, New Jersey. Welcome aboard, everybody, to the Open Mic program, a very special Open Mic program, as we have the MLB Trade Deadline that has concluded about 2 hours ago, and we are going to break it all down. Man, what an exciting day for baseball. It is like Christmas. It's like Christmas and New Year's all wrapped into one on this kind of day when you have all these teams getting involved in, I don't know about you folks, but it seems like more moves this year than we've seen in the years past, and certainly a lot of wild moves and big moves for that matter. So welcome aboard into the program here as we have our MLB Trade Deadline recap show. Michael Cohen here with you, and we'll have a special guest on in just a second as we're going to have Doug Rush joining us to talk about all these trades that went down. But again, huge day. If you want to join us in the chat room, you can. That is now open here on Blog Talk Radio. If you want to call in and opine, 773-897-6156 as well. So let's get this thing started, and we'll bring in our special guest. He is a blogger, blogs about the Yankees, and that is Doug Rush. Doug, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Glad to have you back on, man. Boy, oh boy, like I said, this is like Christmas today when you have all these kind of trades go down. And I don't know about you, but it just seems like this year we've had more rumors going into trade deadline day, and more came out of it than I think a lot of people expected.
I mean, especially with all the teams that feel like they can compete and contend. Aside from the Dodgers and the Astros, who have been the runaway favorites in the respective leagues, I mean, a lot of people like the Yankees, the Indians. All these teams feel like they can compete and make a run in October. So a lot of people were linked to a lot of different things. It's just whether some teams were willing to part with their futures, and some teams were willing to part with some, and others just didn't feel that's comfortable, and we'll see if it pays off for them in the next couple of months and ultimately the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with a couple of big ones. I know that there's one trade that went down right at 0 hour with Yu Darvish going to L.A., which is a huge move in and of itself, but also Sonny Gray finally moves over to the Yankees. Been a lot of talk about this move for several days, if not weeks. At one point, the A's wanted Gleyber Torres and Clint Frazier. Yankees understandably said no, and then they were able to come to an agreement on a deal. A's still get three of the top 9 prospects in the Yankees farm system, but the Yankees get a pitcher that could really be their ace for not just the stretch run here, Doug, but really for the next couple of years since he's under control until 2020.
I mean, ultimately, what the Yankees gave up was a pitcher who's been injury-riddled for the last 2 years and might not pitch for a while, and James Caprillion. They gave up an outfielder, Dustin Fowler, who tore his knee up in his debut game before he could even take an at-bat. And they gave up Jorge Mateo, who, he's transitioning to potentially being an outfielder. I know he's an infielder right now, but a lot of people see him being at the major league level, playing in the outfield and potentially center field. Ultimately, I think he was blocked from ever getting to the show. I feel like he was going to be traded eventually, and a lot of people realize this. Jorge Mateo was involved in a lot of different trade rumors going back to when the Yankees almost got Craig Kimbrell from the Padres. It felt like it was a matter of time before Mateo was going to get dealt. It was just finding the right deal. Brian Cashman is very good at making the right trades, and he ended up getting a pitcher who he can control for the next 2.5 years, and that's a big win for the Yankees. And the fact that
it really is a big win. They get a guy here who's also only 27 years old. I mean, he's still going into the prime of his career, so they really needed this. I mean, with the loss of Michael Pineda going down for the season, CeCe's been up and down most of the year. Tanaka's had an inconsistent year. I know he's pitched a little better of late, but fairly inconsistent. They really need to find someone that they could plug into this rotation that could be kind of a steady presence, and they get that in Sonny Gray, and they also get that with Jaime Garcia. So now, what was a rotation that was really questionable for months, now the Yankees are looking at possibly a 6-man rotation, just to get through the dog days of August going into September before they narrow it down who their top 4 guys are going to be going into the playoffs if they're able to get there. So all of a sudden what became weakness is now a strength for this team.
I mean, there's an old saying that you can never have enough pitching going into October. I mean, what they're going to do with Jordan Montgomery, whether they make him a reliever, if they decide to send him back to Triple, I mean, he's been really good, and exceeded a lot of expectations in his rookie year. So, I mean, they're gonna have to make a decision on him if they're gonna cap his innings or if they're gonna, try to get him some more work, whether it's in the bullpen or in the minors. They have a decision to make, but it's kind of a good problem to have when you have, healthy arms who are capable of winning. And I mean, if the rotation is, Severino, Tanaka, Sonny Gray, CC Sabathia, Jaime Garcia, and you go into that in October, you feel pretty good in a series, and the Yankees are definitely all in for trying to make the playoffs. Whereas last year at this time they were selling off big time to reload for their future, which they've done, and now a year turns around, and now they're competing for a playoff, and not only their future still looks good, but now they're going to contend, try to get that 28th championship.
Yeah, and let me ask you a question, because you as a Yankee fan, was there a point during this where you thought, you know what, it doesn't look like we're going to get Sonny Gray. It looks like it might be just Jaime Garcia, which is fine, but you get Sonny Gray too. That certainly would make it look a little better. Was there a moment last couple of days, especially yesterday, where it looked like maybe it wasn't going to happen?
When the reports came out that Billy Beane was asking for Torres and Frazier, I was like, this is typical Billy Beane, because Billy Beane hates trading with the Yankees. He's always been very anti-Yankee after the Yankees beat his teams when they were, the Zito, Mulder, Hudson team, and they felt like they could have, competed for a World Series. The last trade, aside from like a minor one 3 years ago, that they've even made together was in 2002, and that was the Jeff Weaver deal, and that was a 3-team deal. Other than that, Oakland is one of those teams that like really doesn't like to deal with the Yankees. So the fact that Billy Beane was even interested in dealing with the Yankees was a major surprise to me, and the fact that this got this far was even a bigger shock. And I thought it was almost going to be killed off when they decided to ask for Clint Frazier and or Gleyber Torres. But the fact that Brian Cashman stood his ground, told him no, try again or we're walking away. And the fact they got Jaime Garcia as like that backup just in case, things fall apart, I think Billy Beane realized, okay, this is probably the biggest value we're going to get for him, because as he gets older, the trade value is going to be down, plus the less control you have. So he figured, you know what, I can get some decent prospects from the Yankees, trade him now while I can do something, trade him while he's healthy, trade him while he's pitching well, and ultimately Oakland gets the prospects and the Yankees get the pitcher they wanted, and I think ultimately everybody wins in the end, but I think the Yankees really, really won with this trade.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, you get a frontline starting pitcher, again, who's again in the prime of his career, and now you're looking at a team that is, if they are able to get into the postseason, and it's going to be tough because the Red Sox are playing well, the Rays have been playing well, you got the Royals playing well. We'll talk about what those teams did at the deadline in a moment, but they are in position right now with the offense they have, and I know Aaron Judge has struggled a little bit, but I expect him to start to really come out of it soon. They have now the pitching. We knew they had the bullpen, but now they have the starting pitching to go with that bullpen and that offense. That's a complete team, a fairly complete team, as complete as you can get it, to go into a playoff run for the Yankees in September.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you're gonna make a run, I mean, first you're gonna go through, either the Indians or the Royals. If you get, if you win the division and you get the first round, and then if you get that far, you're possibly looking at Houston, being in the ALCS if they continue to play well. And I mean, you want to load up as many pieces as you can, and having that super pen that they do with all those bullets in those arms, that's key, because you want to shorten the game and make it a 5-6 inning game, and you can mix and match. And if you want to have I mean Terry Francona and Joe Madden really designed this new blueprint of how to win in October, and Andrew Miller part of that last year, just picking when you want to use these big relievers, and now the Yankees are kind of fallen in line of let's get this best bullpen possible and make it impossible for teams to beat you in late in games. And the Yankees so far, their bullpen's been pretty good, aside from a couple hiccups here and there. And, if they get to October baseball, that's a very, very, very tough bullpen to try to go up against.
Yeah, it will be. I'm going to be very interested to see how Joe Girardi is going to do this rotation for the next couple of days. I know they're going to have Severino go tonight against Detroit. CeCe's supposed to go tomorrow. They have Tanaka supposed to go on Wednesday. My guess is that one of them is probably going to get bumped back. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world, so they can get to Sonny Gray an opportunity to start one of these games. I'm very curious to see how he's going to handle this rotation to start things off.
Well, I know Jaime Garcia was slated to schedule Thursday.
Right.
Girardi could obviously decide to change things up now that obviously he has a new pitcher in town, and might want to get Sonny Gray in there just to get him finally his first start with the Yankees. So we'll see what happens.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. Before we move on to some of these other moves here, one more thing on the Yankees. Are you, like I said, I expect Aaron Judge to come out of this slump that he has been in. He did have those 3 home runs in Seattle, but where do you think he is, or 2 home runs in Seattle? Where do you think he is right now as trying to come out of this slump that he's been in since the All-Star break? You think he's going to start to break out of this soon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, post home run derby, post, All-Star break. I mean, every hitter goes through a slump. He's going through his. I mean, who knows? I mean, we're going to turn to August 1st, tomorrow, so he might hit 400 tomorrow. I guess that's kind of like the good thing about baseball in a way. It's like, every day is a new day to kind of like break out of a slump. And, I mean, he's been having this, MVP type season, and, he had so many good months leading into the All-Star break. I mean, a slump, I guess, was due to happen, and you just, this is like really the first time where you get to see like him play this full season in New York as opposed to last year where he came up in just mid-August, and the pressure wasn't really on him. Now he's playing a full season. He's been healthy all year, and he's almost like trying to help carry the load for a team and an offense that's trying to get into the postseason where you're playing extra baseball. So I don't know if he's pressing a little too much, trying to do more stuff and not try to fall into the habits of what happened last year where he was striking out a lot. I think, eventually, if he's as good of a player as everyone thinks he is and what everyone said he is, you think eventually he'll just, snap out of it, whether it's just, the July swoon or just waiting for another series or what happened. I would think eventually, if he's as, good as the MVP that people think he is, he eventually breaks out of it.
Yeah. And now looking around as far as the other trades that went down, the Red Sox really only made 2 signature moves going into the deadline. They get Eduardo Nunez from the Giants. They needed help at third base after releasing Pablo Sandoval, and it's really been a hole there for them the entire season. So they get a guy who has some pop, who can hit for some average. He's gotten off to a good start there for the Boston Red Sox. And then they obviously go out there and they trade with the Mets. They get Addison Reed. And I'll say this, having seen Addison Reed the last couple of years, really was a solid teammate for the Mets over the last couple of years. Never really complained about his role. He always had different kind of roles here, whether it had been as the closer, whether as it was this year, whether it be as a setup guy to Jerry Osmelia, or just someone to come in and get some outs. He was always finding a great way to pitch well for this team. And you know what? He's going to be missed for the Mets. I think he will be. Even though they did get Adrian Ramos from Miami, Addison Reed's presence is going to be missed in that clubhouse. That being said, he now goes to Boston, and you know what? That gives them now an 8th-inning guy that they can use to get into Craig Kimbrell.
I mean, he's going, like you were saying before, he's going to go from setting up to Jerry Familia to setting up for Craig Kimbrell. I think these guys ultimately, at the end of the day, they want to compete for a championship, and I'm sure Addison Reed, as much as he likes being a New York Met, I think he's going to probably like wanting to compete for a World Series, and now he's going to go from being on a 4th-place team to being in the middle of a pennant race. So, I mean, I think he's going to, he's going to be excited about that chance. And, Boston's still in the thick of it. I think they lead in the wild card, so he's going to try to help. He's going to go from helping a New York team to trying to help and beat another New York team. So I think ultimately, though, he's a pro. He's been a closer, and he's been a very good setup man. And he's going to try to do the same now, going from New York to Boston.
Yeah, I mean it's gonna make things a little interesting for Boston. Do they? The thing is, they made their big move in the offseason. I think everyone agrees with that when they got Chris Sale. So there really wasn't a need nor a market for them really to go out there and make one of those big time moves that everyone else did. So that was their big move. They just they want to shore up their bullpen because I just don't know if they had enough guys there to have that kind of postseason experience like a Robbie Scott Heath Hembry, Matt Barnes. Those guys really haven't been there. Ironically, they've just been recently with this team in the last couple of seasons when this team has been to the playoffs. So they get a guy in Addison Reed who has that experience, so it's going to help them out a little bit here down the stretch. Hey, Doug, I think we're losing you. Doug.
Are you still there?
Yeah, you there?
Okay. I mean, this is ultimately going to be one of the first years for Boston where they don't have David Ortiz to kind of fall back on in October. I mean, they got their core with Mookie Betts and Xander Bogaerts and Hanley Ramirez and all those guys. But, I mean, they kind of had their fallback with David Ortiz. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of play this out without, not their defective captain, but, I mean, he was kind of the backbone of that franchise for many, many years. And now they're not going to have him if they're going to make a run to October. So, it'll be interesting to see if some of those younger guys can kind of lead the way, whereas Ortiz used to kind of take the pressure and take the edge off by being the guy who always looked to be the guy with the biggest clutch hits and always got things done when it came to October baseball for Boston.
Yeah, and some of those guys like Mookie Betts, there's going to be a lot of focus on him in the postseason. He's a great player, to make no mistake, but this will be a bit of a new thing for him. Also, for Andrew Benintendi, it's going to be a new thing for him. And they still have Pedroia there to be that guy they can lean on for some of that postseason experience, and also Hanley Ramirez too, to some extent. But for a lot of those guys in that lineup, you're right. It's going to be a bit of a new experience for them if they get in it either as a wild card or as a division champion. We'll see how that work pays off for them at that point. But AL East, it's going to be as I said, just continues to get more and more interesting. Even the Rays, they still feel they're in it. I mean, they're not that far out, 3.5 back. They get Lucas Duda. They get Dan Jennings, left-handed reliever. They get Steve Cishek from the Seattle Mariners. I mean, so they've made some moves to the Rays just to help themselves a little bit. The Lucas Duda trade didn't make too much sense for me because they do have Logan Morrison there at first base. I was thinking maybe more of a DH presence for them, left-handed bat off the bench. But they do get the two pitchers who can help them out in the bullpen. I don't know if the Rays, me personally, I don't think the Rays are going to be there come mid to late September as a true threat to either the Red Sox or the Yankees for the division, let alone wild card. But interesting moves nonetheless for Tampa Bay to try to stay in it.
I mean, Tampa's going to try. I mean, that's why they made the move. They've been one of the bigger surprises over the year. I mean, Lucas Duda is essentially not only just trying to help Tampa, he's trying to get a contract for next year, and he's actually had a decent start playing against the Yankees. So I mean Tampa. I mean essentially they're playing with house money. Nobody thought they were going to compete, and they've been a surprise. Whether they are there at the end or not, I mean, a lot of people think they'll drop off, but essentially they've been a big surprise, and they've got to be pleasantly surprised. And whether they're there or not at the end of the year, we'll see.
Yeah. So that was the news out of the AL East. Now, let's just jump to the big one here, Doug, and that's of course the move that the Dodgers made to go get Yu Darvish. This is a huge move for LA. I guess they want to turn around the years of being that team that always gets to the postseason, has high expectations, and then falls flat. Now they have Darvish here to be that guy behind Clayton Kershaw. You have that as a 1-2, and I know Kershaw is just coming off the DL in a couple of weeks when he does come off. But think ahead towards September, think ahead towards October, and for the Dodgers, who have the best record in the National League, this is just going to make them that much more scary when they have a guy like Yu Darvish moving over from a hitter's haven in Texas and the American League into a pitcher's ballpark in the Dodger Stadium. It's going to be fascinating to see how this guy pitches for the LA Dodgers.
I mean, ultimately getting Yu Darvish, obviously, I mean they've been one of the best teams in baseball, and now getting Yu Darvish, it's for them, it's World Series or bust. I mean, the Dodgers have been one of those teams where they've done really well in the regular season. They get to the postseason and they crumble. And I mean, they've kind of reshuffled the way they've done things. They've, Cody Bellinger's been one of the best, young players in the sport. Yasiel Puig seems like he's more focused on baseball, plus that rotation. And now you're adding, Yu Darvish, who's, also going to be pitching for a contract. I mean, this is all in for the Dodgers. If they don't win, given the year they've had, getting another ace to put 1-2 with Kershaw and Darvish. If they don't win this year, it's going to be a massive. They're going to feel like it's been a massive disaster if they don't end up the year in the World Series or winning it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the pressure's on them, squarely on them this year, and I'm really worried about them because the way things are going right now, you got the Cubs playing well. And if one team the Dodgers don't want to see in the playoffs, it's probably the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs win that division in the Central, and I would imagine if they were to go up against Washington, they might win that series. I know Washington's a good team, but they're also a team kind of like the Dodgers that has to win or else. And they're in that kind of mode. Maybe not necessarily as much pressure as LA, but there's some pressure there. If the Cubs ever went up against the Dodgers in the NLCS, there is going to be so much pressure on the LA Dodgers in that series to not only win that series, but to basically not choke. I mean, if the Cubs find a way to beat them in the playoff series, there's going to be hell to pay.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, that was actually last year's NLCS between the Cubs and the Dodgers. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Dodgers had a 2-1 lead and had a chance to put stomp on the Cubs' throat, and they didn't win another game after that series. So the Cubs have experience. They were able to withstand the Indians in Game 7 after they tied it. They go to extras. They win the World Series. I mean, the Cubs' pressure to win that one championship evaporated. And, I mean, I know that they haven't been as strong as they were last year, but the Cubs have a lot of playoff experience. They've decided to go back all in again by getting Quintana, getting Justin Wilson. I mean, the Cubs are dangerous, and they've got the experience from last year. They've got one of the best managers to, guide them. And they've got a full team of talent that now has a ton of experience in October baseball, especially over the last 2 years. So, yeah, if I'm the Dodgers, I'd be scared to see the Cubs in another NLCS because the Cubs could easily be going back to Fall Classic again, just like they did last year.
They could. Now, Darvish, I'm looking at his numbers here, Doug, and, last 5 starts from him have not been that great, especially 2 of them. He gave up 7 runs over 4 innings to Boston on July 4th. Gave 10 runs in that Adrian Beltre game last week against the Miami Marlins, which they lost 22-10. In fact, there's a good chance that Ezekiel Elliott showed up and fumbled the football in that game with 22-10. I don't even. Oh my goodness, Dolphins beat the Cowboys basically.
Literally football.
So he gave 10 runs that day. I mean, he has struggled. I know it's going to be in a different league now, but I wonder if this is a concern here for the. I mean, it's obviously not a concern for the Dodgers. They went in all in for him. But I wonder if it's going to be a concern moving forward for us as journalists, us as reporters watching Darvish pitch for the Dodgers, if this is going to be something to pay attention to, his struggles.
I mean, I think you'd be more concerned for a National League pitcher going to the American League. I think the other way around for an American League pitcher going to the National League and going from a place like Globe Life Park in Arlington where, you got that hot air, the ball flies out of that park, and you're going to Dodger Stadium where it's a little more spacious, it's pitcher friendly. I could easily see Darvish dominating. I mean, a lot of people have said that the National League lineups tend to be a little easier to face. I mean, Darvish he's even the guy. I mean, it's Kershaw who always gets all the attention. So I mean, Darvish might end up just kind of flying under the radar in a way. And I can see Darvish easily just dominating his time in LA. And like I said, he's a free agent to be, and he wants to get that big payday, being one of the big free agent pitchers out there. So I think for his sake, I think he definitely wants to have a good second half and possibly playoff run. So I can see Darvish just easily just tearing up the National League and dominating like we saw before in Texas.
And to support your point right there, Doug, over his last 6 starts on the road, he has given up only 8 earned runs on the road. So that just goes to show you that, yeah, I mean, it is the ballpark at Arlington, no surprise there. That's playing a big part of that. So he has pitched very, very well on the road, had his issues at home in Texas, but again, moving over to the National League, you would expect him to pitch well. It'll be very interesting to see. There'll be a lot of attention that the Dodgers are going to draw, especially with Darvish now in town, and of course them being the best team record-wise in the league. Now, flipping it over back to the American League, looking at the Central, looking at what the Indians and the Royals did, boy, the Royals were really busy. They get Melky Cabrera yesterday. About a week ago, they went out and they got a bunch of pitchers, including Trevor Cahill, Brandon Maurer, and Ryan Butcher from the San Diego Padres. So the Royals really needed to get some pitching. They did that, especially a starting pitcher like a Trevor Cahill. And now they go out there and they get a Melky Cabrera, which is an interesting move. I mean, they didn't need offense, but, Melky is a guy who's been around, has been in playoff games, been in big games, can play. Interesting moves by the Royals. And then you have Cleveland going out and getting the former Met, Joe Smith. They get him add him to the bullpen. So interesting moves made out of the Central by the top two teams there.
I think at the end, the Indians' experience, having Andrew Miller and Al, that bullpen, and what they did last year, I think it's going to help carry over. I mean, Kansas City, a lot of people thought in the beginning of the season we're going to be selling off with, Hosmer, Muscake, all those guys, and all of a sudden now they find themselves in the wild card race and the AL Central race. They're a feel-good story. They have a lot of those pieces that were still there from 2014 and 15. I just feel like the Indians are just slightly a little bit better and have a little bit more depth to their run in the postseason. They were talking about getting Zach Britton from Baltimore. They were talking about getting Yu Darvish before he went to the Dodgers. Obviously they missed out. They don't want to part with their pieces, but I think the Indians, as is, are still a contender, and I still think at the end, they're the ones who win the Central at the end of the year.
And not to mention, you're going to have the Cleveland Indians going into the playoffs here healthier than they were a year ago. Last year when they got into the playoffs, they were missing a number of their starting pitchers. So they're going to have, in addition they're going to have a Carlos Carrasco now in the rotation. They're going to have to go along with Corey Kluber. They're going to have Josh Tomlin, Trevor Bauer. They're going to have all these guys there, Danny Salazar. All these guys are going to be there this time around, and that's going to make them that much more dangerous going into the playoffs. I know Bauer, Tomlin haven't pitched all that well. I know Carrasco has an ERA close to a little over 3.5. But once you get to the postseason, really doesn't. You can take those regular season stats for the most part and kind of toss them out the window because you've been looking at guys that are going to be pitching in pressure situations. And in a lot of cases, guys who have been there already. So I agree with you. The Indians, if they're able to get into the postseason, and I expect them to do so, are going to be a very, very tough out going into the playoffs. Joe Smith is a nice piece. Kind of adds to that bullpen that's pretty good. That is good as it is already.
Yeah, the one thing from last year, they didn't have Carrasco and they didn't have Salazar for the playoffs. And the Indians essentially went with like a three-man rotation with Kluber, Tomlin, and Bauer, and yet they still, they were doing well up until they got to the Cubs in game 5. Having those two guys in the rotation, I think only helps the Indians' chances of making another run like they did last year.
It does, and again with Kansas City, I have had this discussion with a few others already, and of course, it all goes back to what are they going to do in the long term because they have all these pieces that are going to be potentially free agents. The discussion going into the trade deadline was that maybe they'll try to trade off some of these guys who are going to be free agents next year in the off season. Now they're going to go for it. Only two back of the division. They're right there in the thick of the wild card race. I'm very curious to see one if they're able to not just lock up that wild card spot and try to make some kind of noise in the playoffs, but what are they going to do now moving forward? They're going to have guys Moustakas and Hosmer become free agents here. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep both of those guys. I don't see either one commanding a big contract like $200, $180, $200 million. But are the Royals going to want to spend or be able to spend big money on both of them to keep them? I don't know if they can do that in the offseason. I just think it's going to be tough.
And not to mention another one of their players who I believe is a free agent as well is Lorenzo Cain.
Yeah.
That's another one who is also potentially going to command money, and he's younger. They got some decisions to make, and if they don't make it, this could eventually backfire on them, especially if they lose potentially 1, 2, or all 3 of those players who were key runs from 2 years ago, and they're going to try again, and they don't make it. This could eventually backfire on them if they get eliminated quick or if they don't even make it at all.
Yeah, I'm very. It's gonna be the story. It's gonna be the story of the off season for sure. Because if they're able to make some noise in the playoffs, I don't expect Kansas City to get to a World Series, but I would not be shocked if they get into the postseason. If they make some noise, is it worth it? I guess if they win a World Series, it is. If they don't, if they fall short, if they lose in the playoffs, as one would expect, there's going to be a lot of questions about the strategy they had going into this trade deadline. And the question is going to be again, who of these guys who can they keep? I would imagine Hosmer is going to be the guy they're going to want to keep, but again, you're going to end up losing two other guys potentially in free agency. So it's going to be fascinating to watch what they do going into the off season, for that matter. As far as some of these other notable trades made today, I'm just going made today over the last couple of weeks. Arizona made a couple of moves. They get a second baseman from Oakland. They go out and they also get David Hernandez from the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. Arizona's trying to make a play at the Dodgers. They're too far back now, I think. They're still trying to hold on to that wild card lead with Colorado. Milwaukee's only 5 back. Not as much activity, I think, in the National League, with the exception of the Dodgers, as far as trying to make many major improvements that I've seen. Okay, John Ryan Murphy going to the Diamondbacks, that's a good move, but not a lot of major moves, I thought, out of the other teams in the National League that really stand out. What about for you?
I think the Nationals getting the 2 relievers a couple days ago, Doolittle and Madsen. The bullpen's been their Achilles heel for the longest time, especially in the playoffs. And then the Cubs, when they got, Quintana a couple days, about 2 weeks ago, and then today getting Justin Wilson and Alex Avila as the backup catcher. Those were the two big teams that made the biggest moves, because they're seen as next two contenders after the Dodgers. So, other than that, teams are kind of, settling as is. Some are going to try to go as is without mortgaging their futures. Colorado got Lucroy. They're going to try to go for it. And they didn't really give up anything major. It was a player to be named later. Those were probably the 2 teams that made the biggest moves, because they feel like they need to compete with the Dodgers in trying to get to, the NLCS and the World Series. But obviously the Dodgers decided to make one more bigger move to kind of assure that not only they're playing October baseball, but that they'll be playing in the NLCS and possibly the World Series.
Possibly. As far as the other New York team, the New York Mets, you know what, I'll be honest with you, Doug, and you know me, you know that I'm a Met fan, but I actually am kind of happy with what they did. And I know that they're out of it. I know they're not going to the playoffs, but think about it. They unload Lucas Duda, who had been... He certainly wasn't one of my favorites, but I know a lot of the Met fans liked him. He was an okay bat, not a consistent hitter, provided some power, but you get a pretty good reliever out of that from the minor league reliever in Drew Smith. They get a couple of minor leaguers in the deal for Addison Reed, and then they go out there and they get a potential reliever, maybe even a closer next year in A.J. Ramos. I thought the Mets did pretty good, considering the circumstances that they find themselves in as a team that's going to be out of it, that's going to be trying to rebuild and retool next year. A lot of those guys that are on that roster are not going to be here next year anyway. Guys like Curtis Granderson, who's going to have a contract expiring, as Drupal Cabrera, whose contract is expiring, and they're going to be eventually calling up their young guys like Dominic Smith and Ahmed Rosario. I thought, considering all of that, I thought they did good for what they needed to do.
Well, you mentioned the expiring contract. Tomorrow's August 1st. That starts the waiver deadline. And, a team that maybe an injury happens and you might need a veteran outfielder or an infielder. And if the Mets put, Granderson or Jay Bruce or Asdrubal Cabrera on waivers, a team might feel like they need, some reinforcement. So, it's not, out of the question that they could still move. It's just you might have to go around with the waiver, and maybe they still get moved by August 31st. I was surprised to see them still there. I know there was some talk that Granderson might get moved today, but he stayed put. I know a lot of people were excited to see, A.J. Ramos, which is surprising, but there's still a whole other month that the Mets could make a move and, potentially get something out of these guys. It's not a little more complicated than it is, before July 31st. But yeah, I mean the Mets could still make moves but once August 1st happens.
I wonder if some of the things that have come out with Curtis Granderson coming out saying that he would consider retirement, with Asdrubal Cabrera complaining about his trade status a couple months ago. I wonder if those things got out and people said, I don't know if we want to touch these guys right now. Now, Curtis Granderson is a very good player. He could certainly help a team, even though his stats are not very impressive this year. He would certainly help a team off the bench. But I do wonder if that talk about pending retirement maybe scared somebody off here at the deadline.
He's still an expiring contract, so I don't think that would totally scare somebody off. You're not going to trade your top guys for a 37, 38-year-old outfielder, but as a guy who can be another outfielder who hits for pop and is a good clubhouse leader, if he gets put on waivers next month, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody decides that they want to make a waiver claim and try to make a deal to get Curtis Granderson in a lineup and make a potential playoff push.
Yeah, and the guy that's kind of twisting the wind is Jay Bruce, because here was a guy who had 27 home runs, 72 RBIs. Everyone thought that he was going to get traded. Does not get traded today. And again, look, he could still end up getting traded regardless by the end of August with the waiver deadline. But that's probably one of the guys that is a surprise that he did not get moved, considering the kind of year he's having. But I think for a lot of teams, I'm sure I don't know if you may agree with this. A lot of teams aren't exactly looking for that outfielder that could be that corner outfield guy, provide some pop. A lot of people were looking for pitching in this trade deadline. That's the impression I got at the end of it.
A lot of people want pitching because you're going to be pitching in October as opposed to. It always helps to have offense, but good pitching will always thrive in October, and that's why you saw pitching be the target for a lot of these teams when the trade deadline really got going, and we saw some of the big names get moved.
Let's talk about winners and losers. Doug, I'll let you go first. Give me your winners and losers of this trade deadline.
Obviously, the two biggest winners, I think, are the Yankees and the Dodgers. I think they made strong cases to get to October, and I also have to throw the Cubs in there too. Mm-hmm. The losers, tough one. I think unless they make moves this month with the waiver, I think the Mets, because they could have gotten more. I don't know if Washington did enough aside from the two relievers. I don't think they did enough to enhance their chances for the playoffs. I don't like what Houston did either. I think I don't know if they're such a surefire when they get to October like everybody thinks. So I don't like, and they were trying for Britton, they were trying for Sonny Gray and Darvish, and they struck out too. So I know they're one of the best teams in the American League, but I don't know how well they're going to do in the second half. So I'd throw Houston in there as well.
Yeah, that's a good analysis right there. And for me, my winners and losers would be, well, first of all, my winner, I'm going to go with an individual. I'm going to say Sonny Gray's a winner because he goes from being in Oakland to being on a last-place team that's going nowhere, and now you're going all of a sudden to the middle of a pennant race. You're in New York City. You're on one of the best teams in baseball, not just right now, but historically, and he's going to be here for a couple of years. So Sonny Gray is my biggest winner out of anybody right now, going from the Oakland A's to the New York Yankees. And I also got to say the Dodgers going out there, making a big move, getting you Darvish, obviously, could pay big dividends for them going into the postseason. They also get Tony Watson, a reliever out of the Pirates, so that's a good move as well. So they did make some moves, not just to improve the starting pitching, but also improve their bullpen. So all good moves there for the LA Dodgers. And then, of course, the Cubs, I like that as well with Quintana. You put Quintana in there, in that bullpen, or in that rotation, I should say. You get Justin Wilson. You get a good catcher in Alex Avila. All of a sudden, the Cubs are going to be right there in the thick of this thing for a World Series, another back-to-back repeat of a World Series, as a lot of people expected at the start of the year. My losers, I'm going to say Boston because I thought they could have done more. I know Addison Reed is a good reliever and certainly helps them out in the bullpen. I thought they could have done more to maybe help improve their offense. I don't know if Eduardo Nunez is a true answer at third base long term. Maybe it seems like more of a Band-Aid on a bad situation. I agree with you. Washington didn't do much at all. I thought they would do a little bit more. I know they were well ahead in their division, but they need to find a way to beat the Cubs and the Dodgers. I don't know if Tyler Watson, Howie Kendrick, Ryan Madsen's going to do that. Might, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to do that come October. And I'm going to say Houston, I think, is an interesting one. They get Liriano. I could see them. I could sit there and say they're a loser, not getting more. But I think they're betting on the idea that they're going to get all their guys back healthy. They have Dallas. They had Dallas Keuchel come back off the DL. They're going to get McCullers back soon. So I think they're betting on all their guys being healthy going to the postseason. But at the same time, I say that they also lost George Springer. So I don't know about the Houston Astros going to in the postseason being a team that's going to get to a World Series right now. I really don't.
Yeah, I think also, not to be, the Yankee bias, but Boston. Boston tried to get Todd Frazier, and they were rumored for David Robertson, and they didn't get either one. And they got Addison Reed, but now they're trailing the Yankees by a little bit. And, now they got to get out of the wild card. Whereas they had a month when the Yankees were in that stretch, when the Yankees were struggling and 10 and 20 something. They could have really put some distance between themselves and the Yankees, and they didn't. And now the Yankees are back in first. In fact, they didn't make a big bold move. I know they rely on their guys, but they didn't. They had a chance to really stretch themselves out, and they didn't. So that might come back to bite them.
Yeah, they really didn't. I was really surprised they didn't do much. And Houston. I just don't know what to make out of them. They've had such a great season in the regular season, but I just get the sense that they could be that team that gets to the playoffs and gets knocked out by somebody, whether it be Cleveland, whether it be Boston, whether it be the Yankees. I just think someone's going to go in there into Houston and find a way to take one, maybe two down there in that building before finishing it off in their own building at home.
It happened to them a couple of years ago when they faced the Royals, and the Royals kind of took it to them. They took it to Keuchel, and the fact they didn't get they didn't get Sonny Gray, they didn't get Yu Darvish, and I know they're going to go with their guys as is, but I know Houston's dominated the regular season, but you get into that postseason, and a lot of people thought Houston would do well that year, and Kansas City blew them out, and you can get that team that just gets really hot. And who knows? In a short series, Houston might find themselves going home, losing 3-0 or 3-1. So we'll see what happens, and when they get to the dark day or the dog days and towards October.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, man. Hey, Doug, before I let you go, just what do you got going on right now as far as the writing and blogging on the baseball is concerned?
Lately, most of my stuff is the website called the Inscriber Digital Magazine. Most of my stuff's been on there. Aside from that, find my stuff on Facebook and Twitter. But yeah, for the last year, that's where most of my stuff. It's theinscribermag.com is the website. So another up-and-coming website, just kind of like when I was with Sports Media 101 and when Bleacher Report was first coming out. Another up-and-coming website that's got some promise to it, and that's, if you want to check out my stuff, that's where I'm at.
All right, man. Sounds good. Doug, always a pleasure to have you on, man. Thanks so much, man. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care. All right, folks, that's Doug Rush. Again, he is a blogger. He blogs about the Yankees, blogs about Major League Baseball, and he was joining us. They're kind enough to join us tonight to talk about this MLB trade deadline. And again, a lot of big moves made in baseball today and throughout the course of this week. As I said, really the big winners, the Yankees being big winners, the Dodgers are winners, Cubs are winners out of this deadline. Washington, Boston, Houston, you would have liked to have seen them do more, but again, you can only do so much when players are getting dealt in other places. So, there's always a chance that a team like the Nationals or a team like the Red Sox may have wanted to do a little more, probably didn't. There is a waiver trade deadline that's coming up in August. We'll see if things change between now and then. But going towards the postseason, you're looking at Yu Darvish in L.A., you're looking at Sonny Gray in New York with the Yankees, you're looking at Addison Reed in Boston, you're looking at Jose Quintanilla and a company, for that matter, with the Chicago Cubs. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this thing builds as we hit the stretch drive of the season, get through the dog days of August, going into September, and then obviously into October with the postseason. And from that standpoint, well, the magic begins, of course, as they say. We'll have it for you here in the Open Mic program. Folks, again, I want to thank you all for tuning in and listening. Now, keep in mind, you can follow us on the Sports Talk Nation on YouTube. And in August, we're going to really start to push and have most of our shows exclusively on the Sports Talk Nation on YouTube. So whenever we have a show going on, and of course I'll post it on the social media with the Open Mic program on Facebook, with my own Twitter on Open Mic NJ, and whenever we have a show coming up, you can find it right here on the Sports Talk Nation on YouTube. So, we have a football season coming. We're going to do some training camp capsules coming up here in the month of August. Boom, right onto YouTube. We'll do some other stuff with baseball. Maybe we'll do I like to do some interviews, to tell you the truth. Maybe we'll do a couple of those in the coming month. Boom, right onto YouTube onto the Sports Talk Nation. So that's where you'll find the show. I probably will keep the Blog Talk up, but keep it as a backup. But the YouTube is where you're going to find the show, folks. So again, follow us on the social media, Facebook.com/Open Mic Program, Twitter, that's Twitter.com, and you want to search for the @OpenMicNJ, that's @OpenMicNJ on Twitter. And then, of course, on the YouTube, Sports Talk Nation on YouTube. Folks, been a pleasure. Talk to you next time. Doug Rush, I want to thank him again for coming on and joining us on the show. Folks, trade deadline's come and gone. And now the stretch drive of the 2017 season has begun. Take care. We'll talk to you next time.